But there were exceptions in certain places and times. Jews also participated in the Italian Renaissance with contributions in science, literature, philosophy, music, and even dance. Yet overall, the persecutions continued. Judaism has always had a basic strain of optimism. The Jews did not believe in original sin, and after the exile, they were sure that eventually God would bring his people back to their land, safe from their tormentors. The prophet Jeremiah had foreseen such a result.
I myself will gather the remnant of my flock out of all the lands where I have driven them, and I will bring them back to their fold, and they shall be fruitful and multiply.
Through all of this, the great ideal of Jewish society continued to be study, and the learned man, the scholar and rabbi, was the paragon. The Jews had pioneered a universal education in temple times, and they always ensured that their sons studied, often at the Talmudic academies that flourished in many communities. Adults also found time each day to pore over the Talmud. Sometimes this intensive study evoked a negative reaction. For example, an 18th century pietistic movement known as Hasidism rejected the intellectual element of religious life in favor of a more emotional approach.
The Hasidim, led by their founder, the Baal Shem Tov, the master of the good name, in the medieval period, wanted to bring back into Judaism the celebration of life and the joy and that which was always characteristic of Jewish life in its singing and dancing with the Torah and its feeling of fulfillment in this relationship with God.
Following the American and French revolutions, the Jews were no longer seen as inferiors with no rights. Now they became equal citizens. Many Jews began to question traditional teachings and practices. New forms of Judaism emerged. One of the most influential solutions was Reform Judaism.
Reform came along in the early 19th century, and under the impact of modern biblical scholarship, determined that they no longer believed that God gave Torah complete and finally at Sinai, but that Torah was written by many men over several centuries. Therefore, it is not God-given, but God-inspired.
Traditional rabbinic Judaism now was called Orthodox, to distinguish it from Reform Judaism. While the Jews always knew what they believed, it took a couple of thousand years for them to organize their theology and creed systematically. Unlike Christianity, Judaism never had an official dogma laid down by its authorities. It's true that the Bible is filled with fundamental statements of Jewish belief, but they are scattered. The most crucial sentence appears in the book of Deuteronomy.
Shema Yisrael, Hashem Elokeinu, Hashem Echad. Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one.
This sentence affirms both monotheism and the people's submission to the one God. Implications. The universe is seen to be homogeneous, planned, and formed by a single. The biblical concept of creation has various important mastermind. This universe is not random, but rather it has a purpose. There was no element of chance in the creation of the structure of the cosmos. Every detail was divinely planned. God did not retire after creation, but instead remains involved in all the affairs of the universe, emerging as the God of history. God's providence continually ensures the existence of the world, which he could bring to an end just as he brought it into being. The human being, fashioned in the divine image, is the climax and the purpose of creation.
God, an image. God doesn't have any image. But man has the has characteristics of God himself that sets him apart from all other creatures. God has intelligence on his level, in his way. Man has a mind. Whatever intelligence other creatures might have, none of them will devise the theory of relativity. Man can. It's an intelligence. Perhaps more important even than that, I say perhaps, man can make a moral choice. I decide whether to steal or not to steal, whether to humiliate another person or not to humiliate. It's a sin to humiliate a person. I decide that. It's my moral choice. No instinct compels me to do right or wrong. There is no power on heaven or earth that compels man to sin or do a good deed. It's man's decision. No one compels God, no one compels man. That's why we are in his image.
And this is the essence of Judaism. Now the ancient Jews believed that if they followed Mosaic law, they were performing God's will, and that God was beside them.
In Jewish tradition, the men came to the synagogue 3 times a day to worship. And in order to maintain a sense of community, the rabbis required that there be a minyan, a minimum number of 10 men gathered to worship in order to participate in the full worship experience. This was very important, that they depended on each other to maintain this worship relationship with their God.
They composed the prayers of our prayer book about, let's say, 25 centuries ago. They went through the Bible and found expressions that are appropriate for prayer. In one place it says, "Heal me, O God, and I will be healed." Well, there you got it. Great. It's a wonderful prayer. They made one change in it. Not heal me, but heal us. Not I will be healed, we will be healed. This idea, there's a dependency. A community stays there forever. It continues always. The individuals are replaced. The community continues to go. So the community has responsibility for everybody in the community.
The traditional synagogue was the center of all community activity. Here, the Jew lived much of his life, dreamed his dreams, and communed with both God and neighbor.
The synagogue is the focus of community for Jews. The synagogue essentially in our tradition is a house of worship, a house of study, and a house of fellowship. And it is these 3 aspects of synagogue life that brings the community together and keeps it together. Anochi Adonai Elohecha, asher hotzeisicha me'eretz Mitzrayim mibeit avadim.
Jewish life has always revolved around 2 centers, the synagogue and the home.
The home really has been the sanctuary of Israel. And even though following the destruction of the temple, the whole synagogue movement developed, it was still in the home that Sabbath was observed, the holidays, and there was the richness of the tradition that kept the family observant of that which was holy and that which was precious in their lives.
Guidelines for the relationship between parents and children are well developed in Jewish law and literature. Children are seen as an extension of the parents, and the ideal family is characterized by unbounded mutual love and mutual responsibilities. Children are taught to respect and honor their parents. Children are also treasured in Jewish life, and in former times, barrenness, or what we would call infertility, was seen as a terrible curse. If a wife had no children after 10 years of marriage, Jewish law and custom permitted bigamy in order to produce children.